right, so we are continuing in our exploration of a world that works for everyone and continuing with the themes that have been given to us by the Centers for Spiritual Living. So the title for today is Love. Oh, there's a small subject for you. So the theme for this month is beauty, nature, art, and aesthetics. Beauty, nature, art, and aesthetics. So your beautiful finish to the announcements was right on. And the book that we're reading is Beauty and the Soul by Piero Ferrucci. And it's called, the subtitle is The Extraordinary Power of Everyday Beauty to Heal Your Life. The Extraordinary Power of Everyday Beauty to Heal Your Life. Excuse me. So the quote from Ernest Holmes for this theme of this week is, "We believe in eternal loving kindness." We believe in eternal loving kindness. You've probably seen the bumper sticker, "When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace." It's attributed frequently to Jimi Hendrix, but apparently he got it from Sri Chinmoy. And Sri Chinmoy also said, try not to change the world. You will fail. Try to love the world. Lo, the world is changed forever. So it was a warm summer night in Washington, D.C., and there was a group of friends, 10 people, having a backyard dinner under the stars. And they were enjoying the dinner. It was delicious food. It was a great bottle of French wine. They were just having a wonderful time and just visiting and laughing. And the evening was getting later. It was about 10 o'clock. And all of a sudden, the man looked over, and between him and his wife was an arm with a gun. And attached to the gun was a mid-sized man dressed in a clean sweatsuit who said, "Give me your money or I'll shoot you. Give me your effing money or I'll shoot you." And the problem was none of them had any money. None of them had any money on them. They, were going to visit friends. They were in the neighborhood. They just didn't have any money with them. So they sort of just tried to distract him, but meanwhile, the guy was thinking, somebody's going to get hurt here. So they said, "Well, what would your mom think of what you're doing?" And he said, "I don't have an effing mother. Give me your money." Held the gun to his wife's head, said, "Give me your money or I shoot her." And they tried some other things that wasn't working, and then one of the women said, "Why don't you have a glass of wine?" So he did. They poured him a glass of the wine, and he took a sip, and he said, "Damn, that's a really good glass of wine." And they said, "Well, we also have some cheese." So he started eating the cheese, and he was drinking the wine and eating the cheese, and they're all sitting around under the stars. The crickets are chirping, and they're all just sitting here with this guy who's now stuck the gun in his pocket and is eating the cheese and drinking the wine. And then out of nowhere, he says, "I think I've come to the wrong place." And then he said, "Can I get a hug?" And so the woman leaned over and gave him a hug. Another woman gave him a hug. And then he said, "Could I get a group hug?" And he said, so they stood up and they stood in a circle and they gave him a group hug. And then he took his glass of wine and wandered back into the night. And of course, they all went into the house crying and saying, "Oh my God, it's a miracle. Oh my God, it's a miracle." But actually, what happened was there was a non-complementary response. That's the psychological or sociological term for it. A non-complementary response. And what that is we as human beings, we tend to mirror those around us. We reflect what we get. So if we're around hostile people, we feel hostile. And if we are around warm people, we feel warm. And if we try to be warm to a hostile person and they remain hostile, we're inviting them to the warm side, but if they stay hostile, then the connection is broken. But the idea of being warm in that hostile situation is non-complementary behavior. It's an invitation to experience something else. And so masters at this were Gandhi and Martin Luther King, because they continued to come back from a place of love, even in the face of violence and hatred. They continued to stay centered in that loving place. And that's how they were able to change the world. So right now we're experiencing, all of these kinds of terrorist experiences. And it was very interesting in this story, and of course I'm coming from NPR again, from a program called Invisibilia. It's about things that are unseen. And so this was in Denmark. In the east of Denmark, there's a small town called Aarhus. And in Aarhus, there were two policemen, Alan and Torleif. And Alan and Torleif were in the crime prevention part of the police department. And they started getting calls from parents. They originally got a call from one set of parents. They called them up and said, "Our son is missing." So they were looking all over the place, and then they started getting more calls. And it was another call, and it was another call. Pretty soon, it was 27 young men who had disappeared. And where had they gone? Syria. They had gone to Syria because they wanted to be mujahideen, warriors for God. That's how the framing was happening. So they looked at these 27 young men to see what they had in common. And what they had in common was a mosque. And so they went to the mosque. Now the thing is, when the media found out that this mosque was the factor that united all of these 27 young men, of course that hit they're paying for those kids to go to Syria, and they're preaching, violence against the Western world, et cetera, et cetera. So these two crime prevention policemen from Denmark decided to call the leadership of the mosque to have a talk. They said, "Can we come over for coffee?" So they went over for coffee, and it turned out that the leadership of the mosque was totally freaked out. They didn't know anything about this because they said, the young men think that we're old fogies. They have a separate outside group that they go to. And that's the group that's watching these videos and that's turning them into this. We never paid for any trips to Syria. We don't preach that kind of thing here. And we're concerned because we're losing our young people. He said, now the thing is, a lot of them are going as these mujahideen. And when we think of mujahideen, we think of terrorists. But no, the term in Islam means that you are being a warrior for God, which means you could be working in a hospital or you could be working at a refugee center. You are helping to bring, peace on earth by everyone becoming Muslim, right? That's the idea. And so they said, when these young men come back, if you treat them like terrorists, They will be terrorists. But if you treat them with love and kindness, they can come back and be accepted, returned, become part of our community again. So this was a new thought for the police. Said, okay, greeting them with love and kindness. Well, what would that look like? Well, it seems that Torleif had had an experience when he was an on-the-beat cop, where he pulled over a young Muslim man, and the man was so upset and so hostile to him that Torleif asked, he said, "Why are you being so hostile for me pulling you over?" And he said, "Because this is the 9th time today that I have been pulled over. This is the 9th time today that I'm pulled over just because I'm an Arab." And so Torleif said, "Whoa, am I racial profiling? Am I a racist?" Made him think. I mean, this was a guy who really took it to heart. And so when these Muslim leaders said, "Please welcome these young men back with love and kindness," and if they're going to be going, if they think they're going to go to Syria, reach out to them. Reach out to them. So they set up a hotline. They set up a hotline to let people know that there was a place that if you wanted to let them know that you were fearful that your son was becoming radicalized, you could call it. Or if your son had returned from Syria, you could call it. And so they got a call from these parents. Their son had returned from Syria. So Torleif called him and invited him in for a cup of coffee and asked him, what happened over there. He said, "Well, I was working in a refugee camp." He said, "Well, how did you get shot?" Because he'd been shot. And he said, "It was an accident." He said, Torleif said, "Well, I didn't really believe him. I figured he had been fighting. But, I'm more concerned with redirecting his future than worrying about what he did in the past." And so what he did with the young man was take him to the hospital to get treatment for his wound. And then he got him a mentor to help him to reintegrate into Danish society, and he helped him to get back into school. And so when the word got out that the police really were trying to help, they were setting up mentors, they were getting him back into school, they were doing all of these things to reintegrate them by being helpful, by being loving, by being kind. So they actually talked to one of these young men. One young man, he hadn't actually gone to Syria, but what had happened to him was he was a Somali who had come over when he was 5 years old. His parents were escaping the violence in Somalia. And so he came over to there, and they were the first black people in this part of the village. They were first black people anyone had ever seen. And so he started out, this young man, Jamal, started out getting in a lot of fights because he was, he was black, he was weird, didn't do stuff that they did, and they didn't know what to make of it, and so they got into big fights. Well, then he decided he'd get in trouble with his parents too, and he just thought, "I can't keep doing this," so he decided to be a good student. He was really good at math. And so he started showing them that he was really good at math. And he also started making jokes with the math teacher. And so the other Danish kids could see, "Oh, this guy's okay." So he started making Danish friends, and things were going along swimmingly until there was a debate about Islam. And in this debate, the Danish girl who was speaking said, "Islam is a evil, violent religion. Shouldn't exist on the planet. And so this young man said, are you Islamic? Do you know anything about Islam? He said, and then of course, mirroring her behavior, he said, you're the evil one. You shouldn't be allowed to exist. So, what happened? She reported him to the school authorities, who then had this young man arrested. So they took him to the police station. They questioned him about his terrorist ties, etc., which he didn't have any. And then they took all of his computer and all of his passwords for all of his media sites. And then they further shamed him by going to his home. He had to explain to his mother why the police were there, why they are searching the home, and why they're tearing the home apart. And after that, he didn't go back to school for the next week. He stayed home. He couldn't sleep. He kept thinking they were going to take him to Guantanamo. A young man in Denmark, afraid he's going to be sent to Guantanamo. So he's terrorized, and then after a week, the police come back and say, well, you're clean. Didn't find anything. So he goes back to the school, but they won't give him a mini makeup exams. The principal refuses to give him a makeup exam, says he has to take the year of high school over again. Meanwhile, his mother dies of a heart attack. So the poor guy's in grief. He's feeling like he doesn't belong. After he'd been feeling like he was being accepted, now he doesn't belong. So at the mosque, he meets some other young men. They start hanging out at this apartment with this guy who has an apartment, and they start watching these videos with this imam from England who says, there's a prophecy when the black flag rises over Syria, then the caliphate will be restored. And so they all watch these videos, they get all hooked up in them, and he's like, yes, these are my people. These are the folks that I need to hang with because they accept me. And so he was ready to go down that path until he got the call from Torlife. Torlife called him and asked him to come in for a cup of coffee. So he came in for the cup of coffee. And Torlife said, what's going on? And he just told him what had happened, and that when he was finished with school, he was out of here. And Torlife said, I am so sorry. I am so sorry that we screwed your life up so badly. I apologize. We were wrong. Now, Jamal had never heard a policeman apologize. So this was like something entirely different. It was non-complimentary behavior. It was like, here, I'm going to tell you, I'm getting out of here. You guys are terrible. I hate you. I'm ready to go. And meanwhile, he says, I'm sorry. We blew it. He shifted the whole energy. And so the young man was open to the assistance that Torlife offered. He gave him a mentor, an attorney from Turkey, who was a Muslim, who had a wife and a good job and a home in Denmark. And so he took this young man, Jamal, to a coffee shop in the town. Now, Jamal had been to restaurants, but they were all Somali or Middle Eastern restaurants. He had never been to a Danish restaurant. He had no idea what to do, how to belong, how to be. And so he just did whatever this guy, Erdan, did. He did whatever he did. So the guy had ordered a waffle with cream. He ordered a waffle with cream. And then every week, this guy would meet with this kid. They would go to the movies. They would go to the park. They would go to exhibitions. He would experience Danish society from a whole different perspective. And now he wants to be, to go to university. He wants to be a Danish citizen. Now he thinks of himself as Danish. Now he thinks of himself as Danish because he was accepted as Danish by someone like him. There were 34 guys who left Aarhus that first year. 6 of them were killed. 10 are still there. And the rest came home and got a call from Torleif and turned their lives around. 330 young men over the past few years, that was 2012. Over the past 4 years, 330 young men have been shifted by Torleif and his compatriot Alan, by setting them up with mentors, by getting them jobs, by getting them education, by getting them apartments, by helping them to integrate into the society. In 2015, they only had 1 young man who left. And they had worked with him, but he was just committed. They had gotten him an apartment. He had invited them to his wedding, but he was convinced that he had to go. He said, one of the young men said it was like, it's like going to the Olympics. Something big is happening, and you want to be part of it. You want to be part of this big thing that's happening. There's a big thing that's happening in the world, and you want to be there. And so he went, but that was one person now, one kid. And before that, in 2012, Denmark was the second highest contributing group to that foreign fighters in Syria, the second highest group of all of Europe. I mean, it's not that big a country, but they've turned it around. They've turned it around with love and support, because he said, all these kids want is, they want an identity and recognition. They're coming from a foreign culture into this new culture, just like immigrants here, coming from this foreign culture into this new culture, trying to be balancing between the two worlds. They want an identity. They want to belong. And that's what Torleif said, is these kids are dying to belong. They're dying to belong. And don't we all want to belong? In this wonderful book, Beauty in the Soul, there's a chapter about how when we're young, we often feel like we don't belong. We feel like there's something wrong with us. We're not quite right, especially when we're teenagers. You remember middle school? Oh my God. You just don't know where you fit, how you gonna get through this thing called life. Why the heck are we here? What are we doing? And so, we don't know why we're on the planet, what our relationship is to the people around us, to the environment, to the objects and circumstances of our life. So we see the clashes, we see the suffering, we see the chaos, and we think, oh, why are we here? And what he believes, Ferrucci believes, that beauty plays a central role in our decision to be here, to be present in the here and now, to recognize that we belong. And he asked a bunch of people what the effect of beauty was on their lives. And they said all these things. They said, what are the effects of beauty? And people say, I feel like I belong. And he said, belong to what? He said, a greater whole. I feel like a cell in a living organism, or like an atom of the universe. And he said, meaningful but generic metaphors. And he said, and then I understood. The sense of belonging here is not just belonging to a group, a religion, a family, but to life itself. It is an answer to the question we are continually, maybe unknowingly asking ourselves, do I belong here? To say no means that I feel estranged, painfully separate, and different in a world I do not know and which could well do without me. It is the sensation that something in me is not right, makes me different and cut off from others and the rest of the world. To say yes means that I feel accepted, that my existence is legitimate, that I am part of all that is, that I am part of all that is. The more we can perceive beauty in our surroundings and also inside us, the more we feel at home and glad to exist. So we have beauty available to us. We have love available to us. And hooking up those two things, love and beauty, is what connects us to life itself, is what makes us present fully here. So I'd like you to just think about something beautiful. Think about something or someone that you find beautiful, and it could be anything because, as we know, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So just think about something beautiful and think about how it feels when you think about that beautiful thing. When you see that beauty, you resonate with life. You connect with the infinite possibility provided by a loving universe. Believe that you are beloved of life itself. Or as the minister I saw ordained yesterday said, one of her teachers used to say, the universe is crazy about you. What if you could believe that the universe was crazy about you? How would that shift your life? Ernest Holmes says, if we make ourselves receptive to the idea of love, we become lovable. To the degree that we embody love, we are love. This is why people who love are loved. It does not pay to hate. Hate is a human idea. Love is a divine verity. Love is a divine verity. And so our affirmation for this week is, I believe in the power of love. 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 And so it is.